Hello, my name's Dinah Bell and I'm a watch and clock repairer. Welcome to Mr George's Museum of Time. Today I'll be telling you my story, how I grew up as a watch and clock repairer's daughter, became a watch and clock repairer myself, how I came to write these children's stories based on my father, and how we came to open this museum. Well, to start with, as I said, my father was a watch and clock repairer, and from a very young age I used to go with him to his workshop. I always loved going because there were lots of things to see and do. My father says I took my first watch apart when I was 4. Mind, I couldn't put it back together again. I spent the first part of my life in Newton Aycliffe, County Durham, because my father was a watch and clock repairer there. Then I was about 13, we moved up to Wooler, which is North Northumberland. And that's where I've got the ideas for the Mr George stories, but I'll come back to that again soon. I didn't go fully into working with my father until my late teens. I did my apprenticeship and I became a watch and clock repairer. Then we moved down to Whitley Bay, Tyne-and-Wear. We set up a workshop there, and that's where I met my husband. Then after that, my father, after a while, said he would like to retire. But unfortunately, just before he retired, he died. But at the time we were expecting my second child, and always said I would retire when my father did. There's no way I could work with already having 2 children without my dad. So after my father retired, I just shoved everything into the cupboards and got on with life basically. Then after that, I had 2 more children. This is a very condensed summary of my life, by the way. Didn't have much time to do repairs apart from family and friends. But unfortunately, after my son was born, my husband died. But just prior to that, I always read children's stories to my children on a nighttime bedtime stories. I got fed up of reading Postman Pat, Fireman Sam, and I thought, well, what should I write if I'm going to create a children's story? So I got the inspiration while I was lying in the bath, as you do. I know, write about what you know. So the idea came of writing the Mr George stories based on the time when we were up at Wooler, when my father used to go out to big houses to repair clocks that were too big to be brought into the workshop. And I used to go with them as well. So that's when the Mr George stories were launched. But shortly after my husband died, we decided to move back into Northumberland for a new start. So we moved up to Morpeth. And it was when we moved up to Morpeth that my stories came a reality. I met my best friend in the playground, as you do, and she was very artistic, was my friend Annie. And she encouraged me to develop the stories of Mr George. But the way that they were developed was completely different to how I thought it. Now my friend Annie, she worked with children a lot, and she used puppets to communicate to children with disabilities. Now at the time, I was a youth lead at our Methodist church, and our young people were interested in learning puppeteering, along with my 3 daughters. My son was too small at the time to learn puppeteering. Anyway, they loved doing the puppets. And then one day, me and my friend suddenly I had the idea, why don't we produce the Mr George stories as a storytelling puppet show? Now you might remember the children's programme, Jack and Ori, where you had somebody sitting on the chair reading a children's story while the pictures from the book was projected on the screen. Well, that was the idea what we had, where instead of having a person sitting on the chair, you'd have a puppet sitting on the chair, miming to the pre-recorded stories. So anyway, we're just very fortunate we had all the right people available to make this possible, from the artist who drew all the Mr. George characters through to the recording person, to the person who did the voice over Mr. George. So many people were involved in the project. Anyway, our young people said yes, they wanted to take part, and of course we had the Mr. George song, which you can hear on our website. So we decided to launch it at the Morpeth Gathering, just to test to see how the stories would be developed, be received. So we started off and we did our shows, and everybody loved it and asked us for the CD. To start with, we just had the 2 stories on CD, which were the soundtrack from the shows. And then from there we went into schools and we travelled around the area doing the Mr. George stories in puppet version. From there I got asked out to speak at various groups, adult groups, where I dragged out a lot of the articles from our workshop. Everybody loved it. Then after that I had a vision, wouldn't it be wonderful to bring everything into one place, where the children could come along and learn all about Mr. George, proper watches and clocks in a fun and exciting way, and where grown-ups could reminisce all about the old watches and clocks. Cut another long story short, at the time my second daughter Deborah was at university in Lancaster. We used to travel up and down the railway line a lot from Newcastle to Carlisle, and en route we kept passing this place called Haltwhistle, which is in northwest Northumberland. So anyway, we felt compelled we had to come here for the weekend. So we booked in a B&B and we just had a look around, walked along the street, saw this premises, and we thought, that looks very interesting. And Haltwhistle is very similar to Wooler because it's a border country town, a market town. So anyway, cut another long story short, we came in to view the premises, and it was exactly how I visualised it. Cut another long story short, we upped sticks and moved up to northwest Northumberland and opened the Museum of Time 6.5 years ago. So we have got, well, this is the Meet Mr. George room, where you can learn all about the history of Mr. George, how we came to open the museum. Next door we've got the clock room, then the watch room, then another activity room called the school room, where groups can meet, where I can do talks, and where you can watch a DVD of Mr. George. And also, as soon as I opened the front door, people said, do you do repairs? So now I am fully back into watch and clock repairing, because there is a big demand. There's not so many people around. So say from small beginnings, from just scribbling down stories on, bits of paper, to coming to write these stories about Mr. George and develop them as a storytelling puppet show, right through to open this museum. It is quite unbelievable. But if you're interested in following us, please do. I will put some more video posts on about general watch and clock repairs. So if you follow our website, the details are down below. And if you want to subscribe to us, please do. This is Dinah Bell saying goodbye from the Museum of Time in Haltwhistle. Bye.